In the heart of rural Kansas, nestled between a hardware store and a laundromat, stood Olivia's Denera modest establishment, where life moved at the unhurried pace of small-town America. Here worked Sarah Collins, a 29-year-old waitress whose routine was as predictable as the seasons. Each morning before dawn, she would walk the 3 blocks from her one-bedroom apartment above the local pharmacy, tie her faded blue apron around her waist, and greet the morning regulars with a smile that concealed the profound loneliness behind it. Sarah lived alone, surrounded only by photographs yellowed with time-silent reminders of the family she had lost. Her father had passed when she was 15, her mother just 2 years later. The aunt who raised her had relocated to Arizona for her arthritis, leaving Sarah with nothing but occasional holiday phone calls and infrequent letters. On a crisp Tuesday in early October, Sarah first noticed the boy. He couldn't have been older than 10 small for his age, with watchful eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. He sat in the corner booth farthest from the door, an oversized backpack propped beside him and a book perpetually open on the table. The first time, he ordered only a glass of water. Sarah brought it with a gentle smile and a paper straw. His thanks came as a nod so slight it was barely perceptible. The second day was the same, and the third, and the fourth. By the second week, Sarah had mapped his pattern. He would arrive precisely at 7:15, exactly 45 minutes before school began at the elementary 3 blocks away. He would sit, read, and sip his water slowly, watching as other customers ordered stacks of pancakes, eggs, bacon, and toast. At 7:55, he would close his book, thank her, and leave having eaten nothing. On the 15th day, Sarah approached his table with a plate of steaming pancakes. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, setting it down with convincing confusion. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it away." The boy looked up, suspicion and hunger battling in his eyes. "It's okay," Sarah reassured him, her voice soft but firm. "Sometimes the cook gets the orders mixed up. Better to eat it than waste it, right?" She walked away before he could protest, watching from behind the counter as he hesitantly picked up the fork. When she returned 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, and the boy's eyes remained fixed on his book, a deliberate avoidance that broke her heart. "Thank you," he whispered as she collected the plate, his voice barely audible over the diner's ambient noise. It became their unspoken ritual. Each morning, Sarah would bring the mistaken order or the extra batch. The cook had Medepin cakes one day, scrambled eggs and toast the next, oatmeal with brown sugar when the mornings grew colder. The boy never asked for anything, never initiated conversation beyond a quiet thank you. But he ate every bite, sometimes so quickly it seemed he feared the food might disappear. "Who's that kid you keep serving?" asked George, a retired postal worker who occupied the same stool every morning. "Never seen his parents." "Don't know," Sarah admitted, refilling his coffee cup without breaking stride. Diane, who worked the grill, cornered Sarah in the back after the 3rd week. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly, but with the pragmatism of someone who had seen good intentions backfire. "You give handouts, they never learn gratitude. He'll just disappear one day. They always do." Sarah didn't argue. She simply shrugged and said, "It's fine. I used to be that hungry too." It was the most personal information she'd shared with her co-workers in the 3 years she'd worked at Olivia's. The boy never volunteered his name, and Sarah never asked. Something in his demon-orthy careful way he entered and exited, how he angled himself to see both the door and the window told her that questions would only drive him away. Instead, she made sure his water glass stayed full, that the pancakes were always warm, and that the diner felt like a place where he could breathe easier for 40 minutes each morning. Sometimes when the diner was quiet and the boy was absorbed in his book, Sarah would allow herself to wonder, was he living nearby? Did he have family? Why was he always alone? And why did hunger seem like a familiar companion to him? But she pushed the thoughts away. In her experience, kindness with conditions wasn't kindness at all. So she continued their silent arrangement, watching as the boy's shoulders gradually lowered from their perpetually defensive hunch, as his eyes began to meet hers for a second longer each time she approached his table. That small changeth moment of eye contact that stretched from a millisecond to perhaps two is enough to convince Sarah that whatever she was doing, however small it might be, mattered. By the 6th week, others had noticed Sarah's routine with the boy. Most said nothing, but some couldn't resist commenting, their observations laced with the particular cruelty of those who have forgotten what it means to need help. Playing charity worker on company time, asked a businessman who frequented the diner, his tone suggesting he found the entire arrangement distasteful. Kids these days expect handouts everywhere. Times must be changing, remarked another regular. In my day, no one gave away free food just because someone looked sad. Sarah heard these comments, but let them slide off her like rain from a window pane. She'd learned early that defending kindness often hardened the hearts of those who criticized it. However, Robert, the diner's manager, wasn't so easily ignored. He called Sarah into the small office behind the kitchen one morning, his expression serious beneath his perpetually sweaty brow. "I've been watching you with that kid," he said, fingers tapping against the laminate desk. "Can't have employees giving away free meals. It's bad for business and sets a precedent." Sarah twisted her apron in her hands. "I understand. I'll cover the cost myself." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "From your tips. Those barely cover your rent." "It's my choice," Sarah replied, something resolute in her voice that made Robert study her more carefully. "Just one meal a day. I can manage." After a moment, Robert sighed. "Fine, but if it affects your work, or if that kid causes any trouble, it stops immediately." "Understand." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. She'd anticipated being reprimanded, perhaps even fired, but this compromise she could live with. Each morning, she set aside a portion of her tips money that might have gone toward a new winter coat or the dentist appointment she'd been postponing getting paid for the boy's breakfast. On a particularly cold Thursday in November, the boy didn't show up. Sarah found herself checking the door every few minutes, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. She prepared his usual plate of pancakes anyway, setting it at his empty booth just in case. "Waste of food," Diane muttered as she passed by, shaking her head. By closing time, the untouched plate had become a silent rebuke. Sarah wrapped the cold pancakes and took them home, unable to simply throw them away. The boy didn't appear the next day either, or the next. A week passed with no sign of him, and Sarah began to wonder if Diane had been right. Had he simply moved on, as strays often did? The thought left her with a hollow ache she couldn't quite explain. She'd known nothing about him, not his name, not his story. Yet his absence felt significant. A small light extinguished. "Told you," Diane said on the 10th day of his absence, not unkindly, but with the assurance of someone whose pessimism had once again been validated. They never stick around once the free ride ends. During this period, Sarah noticed a customer taking photos of the empty booth where she still occasionally left a meal, just in case. The next day, she discovered why. A local Facebook group had shared the images with a mocking caption, "Olivia's Diner now serving imaginary charity cases." The comments were even worse, "Publicity stunt. But they'll claim the food goes to underprivileged children while throwing it away. Feeding strays just creates dependency. That waitress needs a reality check. Next time a strange kid approaches you, remember this: you are being set up for something." Sarah had never considered herself particularly vulnerable to others' opinions, but the cruelty of these comments stung. That night, alone in her apartment, she questioned her actions for the first time. Was she foolish to help someone without knowing anything about them? Was she projecting her own past onto a situation she didn't understand? Seeking comfort, she opened the small wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions. Inside lay a faded photograph of her father in his army medic uniform, his smile gentle despite the harsh desert backdrop. Beside it was the small leather journal he'd carried through his service, the pages worn from frequent handling. Sarah opened it to a dog-eared page, reading the words she knew by heart. "Shared a half ration with a local boy today. Johnson said I was crazy, that he'd probably report our position to hostiles. Maybe, but the look in his eyes when he ate same as mine, when Mom would save me the last piece of bread. During the hard times, no one grows poor by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget to share remain hungry their whole lives." Sarah traced her finger over her father's handwriting, a sudden clarity washing over her. She didn't need to know the boy's name or story to recognize hunger. And hunger, whether physical or emotional, asked for bread, not questions. On the morning of the boy's 23rd absence, Sarah arrived at the diner with diminished expectations. The habit of looking toward the door at 7:15 remained, but the sharp anticipation had dulled to a quiet resignation. Still, she prepared a small plate of pancakes, just in case, and placed it at his usual booth. At 9:17 a.m., everything changed. The first sign was the sudden quiet that fell over the usually bustling diner. Sarah, refilling coffee at a booth near the window, glanced up to see four black SUVs with government plates pulling into the small parking lot. They moved with choreographed precision, forming a semicircle in front of the entrance. Customers stopped mid-conversation, forks paused halfway to mouths. Outside, pedestrians slowed to stare as uniformed men emerged from the vehicles, standing at attention beside each door. From the lead SUV stepped a man whose bearing commanded attention before his uniform did. Tall, with the weathered face of someone who had seen too much sun and too little peace. He wore the dress uniform of a high-ranking military officer, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons and medals that caught the morning light. He scanned the diner's facade before walking purposefully toward the entrance, flanked by two younger officers. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, the sound unusually loud in the expectant silence. Robert emerged from the back office, straightening his tie nervously. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. The senior officer removed his cap. "I'm looking for someone who works here. A woman named Sarah." The diner became so quiet Sarah could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward, coffee pot still in hand. "I'm Sarah," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden dryness in her throat. The officer's stern expression softened slightly. "Sarah Collins?" She nodded, setting down the pot before her trembling hands could betray her anxiety. "My name is Colonel James Reynolds, United States Army Special Forces Command." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew an envelope, crisp and official-looking. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men." He extended the envelope toward her. "This is a letter from the Commanding General of Special Forces Operations, and I have a personal message as well from Michael's father." "Michael?" Sarah repeated the name, unfamiliar yet somehow significant. "The boy you've been feeding for the past several months," Colonel Reynolds explained. "Michael Anderson. His father was Master Sergeant William Anderson, one of the finest soldiers under my command." The past tense landed like a physical weight on Sarah's shoulders. "I don't understand," she said, still not taking the envelope. "Is Michael okay?" "He's safe," the colonel assured her. "He's with his grandparents now in Colorado, but for almost 3 months. He came here every morning before school, after his father was deployed on a classified operation." The pieces began falling into place for Sarah, the boy's solitude, his careful watchfulness, the hunger that seemed deeper than physical need. What Sergeant Anderson didn't know, the colonel continued, was that his wife had left shortly after his deployment, abandoning Michael. The boy was too proud, too afraid of being taken from his home to tell anyone. He managed alone, using the small emergency fund his father had left, making meals stretch beyond imagination. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the diner. Sarah felt her heart constricting as she imagined Michael with a name, with Astora trying to survive alone, waiting for a father who would never return. "Sergeant Anderson fell in Afghanistan 2 months ago," Colonel Reynolds said, his voice professional but not without emotion. In his final letter, he wrote that if anything happened to him, we should thank the woman named Sarah at the diner who fed Michael without asking questions. He opened the envelope, removing a handwritten note on faded paper. He wrote, "If I don't make it back, please find the person who has been giving my son breakfast." Michael mentioned her in his letters to me. He said she never asked why he was alone or made him feel ashamed. She just fed him day after day, expecting nothing. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child, she preserved the dignity of a soldier's son. Sarah accepted the letter with trembling hands, tears blurring her vision. The colonel's voice seemed to come from far away as he continued. The letter was read at Sergeant Anderson's memorial service. When Michael finally told us about you, the entire Special Forces community made it our mission to find you and thank you in person. What you did, his voice caught briefly, what you did for the child of one of our own. Without even knowing who he was, that means something to all of us. The diner had fallen completely silent. Even those who had mocked Sarah's actions sat motionless, faces reflecting shock and, in some cases, shame. Colonel Reynolds straightened to his full height, snapped to attention, and rendered a formal salutation, a gesture of profound respect rarely given to civilians. Behind him, every military person present did the same. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, the brothers in arms of Master Sergeant Anderson, and most importantly, on behalf of Michael, thank you. Sarah stood frozen, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her simple acts of kindness, pancakes and eggs, a glass of milk, a smile without question had meant so much to a boy living through unimaginable circumstances, to a father fighting his last battles far from home. I didn't know, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't let him go hungry. The colonel nodded. Sometimes that's enough, Miss Collins. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all. As if on cue, every military person in the room and every soldier standing outside by the vehicles saluted in perfect unison. The customers in the diner, moved by the ceremony unfolding before them, rose to their feet in silent respect. Sarah, the quiet waitress who had lived nearly invisibly for years, stood in the center of it all, clutching a father's last thank you in her hands, a woman whose small daily kindness had preserved not just a child's well-being, but a soldier's honor and peace of mind in his final days. The week following the colonel's visit transformed Olivia's diner in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread through town like wildfire, jumping from conversation to social media to the local newspaper. The same Facebook group that had mocked Sarah's charity case now shared a heartfelt retelling of Master Sergeant Anderson's letter, gathering thousands of shares and supportive comments. Regular customers began requesting Sarah's section specifically. They left generous tips with notes of appreciation. Thank you for reminding us what matters. And my son is in the Navy. Your kindness gives me hope. Robert, who had initially grudged Sarah's free pancakes, hung a small American flag beside the booth where Michael had sat. Beneath it, he placed a discreet plaque, reserved for those who serve and the families who wait. The booth was never empty again, occupied by veterans, active duty personnel passing through town, and occasionally by families clearly struggling, but treated with quiet dignity by the staff. On the 7th day after the colonel's visit, a manila envelope arrived addressed to Sarah. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the carefully formed letters betraying the youth of its author. Dear Miss Sarah, I didn't know your name until that day the colonel came to find you. But every morning for those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Dad always told me that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear the uniform. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world had forgotten both of us. But you remembered me every day, even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. Grandma and Grandpa are nice. They're teaching me to fish, and Grandma makes good cookies. But I miss Dad, and sometimes I miss your pancakes too. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer them. Your friend, Michael Anderson. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending after all. Sarah framed the letter and hung it behind the counter, not prominently, not for show, but as a personal reminder of why small kindnesses matter. When customers asked about it, she would simply smile and say, "Just a thank you note from a special customer." Word of the diner's connection to Special Forces spread throughout military communities. Soldiers passing through town made detours to visit, often leaving unit coins or patches as tokens of appreciation. These, too, found their place on a small bulletin board behind the counter, a growing collage of gratitude from around the world. 3 months after the colonel's visit, a school group came to the diner for lunch after a field trip. An 8-year-old girl with curious eyes studied Sarah as she refilled water glasses. "My dad says you're a hero," the child announced matter-of-factly. "Do you feel like one?" Sarah smiled, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry. Not just for food," the girl's teacher added quietly, having overheard the exchange. Sarah looked up, meeting the woman's understanding gaze with a nod. The teacher was right. Hunger came in many forms. Food was only the most obvious. As summer approached, the diner hosted a fundraiser for military families, raising enough to establish a small emergency fund for children of deployed parents. Robert, surprisingly, matched the donations personally, admitting to Sarah that her quiet persistence had changed something in him. "Never understood why my father was so adamant about feeding every stray kid in the neighborhood," he confessed. "Drove my mother crazy, but I think I get it now. Sometimes a meal is more than food." On a quiet Tuesday morning, almost exactly a year after Michael had first walked into the diner, Sarah arrived for her shift to find something small and metallic on her usual station. A challenge coin special token carried by military personnel, usually given only to those within their units, lay beside her order pad. One side bore the insignia of the Special Forces. The other had been custom engraved, Semper Memor, always remembering. Sarah looked around the empty diner, searching for whoever might have left it. Finding no one, she stepped outside, scanning the street as the early morning breeze gently stirred the American flag hanging above the entrance. No unusual cars were parked nearby, no waiting messengers, just the town waking up, sprinklers ticking on lawns, and the distant sound of the school bus making its first rounds. She slipped the coin into her pocket, its weight a comforting reminder that kindness offered without expectation sometimes returns in unexpected ways. That evening, as she hung her apron before heading home, Sarah noticed Robert placing a new sign in the diner's window. Simple but elegant, it read, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." When he caught her watching, he shrugged self-consciously. New policy. Figured it was time. Sarah smiled, understanding the unspoken acknowledgement in his gesture. No grand speeches, no public declarations, just a quiet commitment to see the hunger in others and respond with what was needed most: food without judgment, kindness without questions. As she walked home in the fading light, the challenge coin a solid presence in her pocket, Sarah thought about Michael, now growing up with his grandparents in Colorado, carrying his father's memory and perhaps, she hoped, the knowledge that even in one's darkest moments, kindness exists in unexpected places. Not everyone who helps needs recognition. Some people just need to know that today someone isn't hungry, and that alone is enough to change a life. As the seasons changed and years passed, Sarah's simple act of kindness continued to ripple outward in ways she could never have imagined. The diner became known throughout the region not just for its food, but for its heart. Military families would drive hours just to sit in Michael's booth, often leaving notes and small mementos that Sarah carefully preserved. One evening, as Sarah was closing up, she noticed an elderly couple standing outside. Peering through the window, their faces wore the weathered look of people who had seen much of life's hardships. She unlocked the door and invited them in, despite the late hour. "We drove all day to get here," the woman explained, her voice trembling slightly. "Our grandson is deployed overseas. He told us about this place about you and said we should come if we ever felt worried about him." Sarah served them coffee and pie, listening as they shared stories of their grandson. No payment was offered or expected. This too had become part of the diner's unwritten policy, a safe harbor for those carrying the invisible weight of loving someone in uniform. As they were leaving, the elderly man pressed something into Sarah's hand, a handcrafted wooden pendant in the shape of a heart. "Our grandson carves these when he's on watch," he explained. "Says it keeps his hands busy and his mind at peace. He wanted you to have one." Sarah added it to her growing collection of treasures, each item a testament to the truth her father had written in his journal so many years ago, that no one grows poor by sharing. On the 5th anniversary of Colonel Reynolds' visit, a documentary filmmaker came to the diner, hoping to capture the story that had inspired military communities across the country. Sarah initially declined to be on camera, preferring her kindness to remain quiet and personal. But Robert convinced her that some stories needed to be told not for recognition, but because they might inspire others to see the hunger around them. The world needs reminders that compassion doesn't require grand gestures, he argued. Sometimes it's just pancakes and patience. The documentary, titled Invisible Hunger, went on to win several awards and was shown at military bases worldwide. Sarah received letters from people who had started similar initiatives in their own communities. A free lunch program at a school in Texas, a pay-what-you-can cafe in Michigan, a food delivery service for elderly veterans in Florida. And Michael, he graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to the United States Military Academy at West Point. On the day before he left for basic training, he returned to the diner, now a tall young man with his father's steady gaze and determined chin. Sarah recognized him immediately, despite the years that had passed. They embraced without words, the connection between them transcending the need for explanation. Michael sat at his old booth one last time, this time ordering pancakes and paying for them himself. When he finished, he left an envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph of him standing beside his father's grave, dressed in his cadet uniform, and a note that read, "Some debts can never be repaid, only passed forward. I promise to remember what you taught Method sometimes. The greatest gift is simply seeing someone's hunger and responding with kindness." As Sarah watches the sun set from the diner's window each evening, she often reflects on how a simple plate of pancakes changed not just one life, but countless others. She never set out to be remarkable or heroic, she simply couldn't bear to see a child go hungry. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all, that extraordinary change begins with ordinary compassion, offered freely and without expectation. That in a world often focused on grand gestures and public recognition, it's the quiet acts of kindness that truly nourish the soul. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of simple kindness, subscribe to Whispers of the Soul, where we share stories that celebrate the quiet heroes among Justos, whose compassion changes the world one small act at a time. Because in a world that can sometimes feel cold and indifferent, these whispers of kindness remind us of our shared humanity and the difference each of us can make.